So we'll go for the Core 7, Unit 1, Historical Overview, Developments in Society and Economy that leads to the First World War and the resultant change or changes in ways of knowing and perceiving. Let's go to the first one. What does it say? Understanding the development of English literature that requires us to delve into the historical, social, and economic context that shaped it. The early 20th century was a period of huge transformation in Western society, driven by rapid industrialization and economic changes and the upheaval of the First World War. Right. So, and these shifts influenced what? How people viewed themselves, their societies, and the world around them. So, two significant thinkers of this time, who are they? One is called Karl Marx, and the other one is Sigmund Freud. Right. So, they introduced ideas that reshaped the perceptions of human behavior and societal structures, leaving on a kind of a mark which is called as a permanent mark on literature. Who are they? Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. So then we talk about what developments in society and economy, and when we talk about developments in society and economy, we find out that industrialization and urbanization, so which we already discussed during the 19th century. So what we understood in that by the late 19th century, industrialization had firmly taken root in Western societies, and that brings significant changes to economies and lifestyles. And factories replaced nothing but traditional workshops, like I pointed, and cities expanded rapidly as people moved to what? From rural areas to urban areas in search of what? Their work. So the urbanization created nothing but the new opportunities, but at the same time, it also led to what? Overcrowded living conditions, poverty, and social inequality, isn't it? So, and the rise of industrialism means helpful for whom? Now, those who are capitalist or means these are industrialist, isn't it? Because they brought wealth to a few while marginalizing many, right? So you can say that what the rise of industrial capitalism brought huge wealth, to a few. At the same time, means there are many people who are working under them, right? So the working class often subjected to living in a harsh labor conditions and low wages became increasingly aware of their move. So they know that what kind of a condition where they are living. So this awareness that set the stage for what social and political movements that supporting for workers' right and economic justice, isn't it? So the then you talk about the growth of nationalism and imperialism. So when you talk about nationalism and imperialism, what do you mean by that? What is the meaning of nationalism and what is the meaning of imperialism? The meaning of nationalism is indicating to the means people who love for the nation, and imperialism who rules, isn't it? So during the 19th and early 20th centuries, you would find out that nationalism emerged as a powerful force, right? So many European nations, they wanted to expand influence through what? Imperialism, or called as a ruling, right? So how do they rule? They rule nothing but colonizing, isn't it? So colonizing territories, like you would find out in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, isn't it? So while imperialism fueled economic growth, and provided access to resources, it also, means does nothing but exacerbate. Exacerbate means called as excessively harm, right? Excessively harm or excessively created dangerous tensions. right? So, dangerous tensions among rival nations. So, the competition for colonies and the desire for dominance that led to alliances and rivalries that finally contributed to the outbreak of the what? First World War, isn't it? So, and the First World War marked a what? Turning point in Western society. So how? Now, because it challenges traditional notions of power. It not only power, morality and progress. So this is something called as a nationalism and imperialism, and how it leads to nothing but the World War. And after World War, what happened? We find out the means a turning point, and that turning point is called the Western society and power, morality, and progress. Right. Then you find out the next one, which is called as economic inequality. Economic inequality and class struggle. When we talk about economic inequality, it means we talk about poor and rich, right? So the gap between the educated and illiterate, isn't it? So the gap between the wealthy elite means called as those who have the wealth, huge money, educated, and the working class that widened during this period. We know that when we read that romantic movement, isn't it? So wealthy elite and the working class widened during this period, and industrial magnates means called as the leaders or tycoons, business tycoon. Industrial business tycoons, so they accumulated, gathered their what? Gathered their huge money, while workers often struggle to meet basic needs. It means rich becomes richer, poor becomes poorer, isn't it? And this disparity means this saddened became a central issue. This issue became a central issue for whom? For those of the theorists, right? Not only those romantic writers who write, and it also becomes a central issue for the theorists. Theorists like whom? Theorists like Karl Marx, right? Karl Marx, whose ideas about class struggle, because he found out what? Now he's found out there is a differentiation, there is a disparity, there is a means what you can say that uh, partiality, isn't it? So partiality between whom? Rich or poor, or called as employees and employers, and you would find out that what? Elite and illiterate, isn't it? So therefore, means his ideas about class struggle and economic system that profoundly influenced to who? Profoundly or hugely impact on those of the people who are knowledgeable, intellectual, and those who are means coming under political landscape, right? So in that case, that is what you would find out Karl Marx's contribution. So who is Karl Marx? We can say that one of the sociologists, right? So and who considered this as the central issue. Right now, the next one, it is stated about the First World War and its impact. As we stated about the First World War, and after that, how it takes the turn into the Western society. So, the First World War and its impact. So when we talk about the First World War, means how did that war outbreak? The outbreak of war. So the First World War, when did it occur? 1914, right? And it continued till 1918, and it was nothing but a cataclysmic that called it a destructive, right? Destructive event that reshaped Western society. Right. It doesn't mean that Western society was not present. Western society was present, but it was reshaped because war reshaped it. It was controlled by a combination of factors. So, means why did the World War occur? Now, because of the combination of factors. What are those combination of factors? Including militarism, right? So, militarism, alliances. You understand that called the two different nations united, imperialism, ruling, and also nationalism, right? So these are militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, isn't it? So it stated that the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, right? So you are talking about one of the person, right? So his name is called as the assassination. What do you mean by assassination? That called as a secretly you killed, right? The leader, the king, the monarch. So whose name is called as Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So and he belongs to Austria-Hungary, acted as the immediate spark. So and killing to that is nothing but creating nothing but the immediate means of fire, right? Now you killed the means leader of one particular nation, and what happened? It spreads, means it spreads everywhere. The fire spreads everywhere. So, but the underlying causes were deeply rooted in the tensions and rivalries of the preceding decades, right? So, it's if you talk about that, how did it all start? If you think of it, means you would say that what the story is nothing but a big one which is lying in the past, right? And for which you would find out the assassination occurs, right? So, but at the same time, this assassination nothing but acted as the immediate spark or fire means to the world. So, but the underlying causes were deeply rooted in the tensions and rivalries of the preceding decades. So, second is called as the human cost of war. Right. So, and we know that the World War occurs, right, because of this assassination, right? So, and what kind of a cost that the war brings? You can say that the war was unprecedented. No one controlled it, right? And it is surely happening. Right. The war was unprecedented in its scale. You can't even imagine. So the kind of a brutality, killed, murder. So millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, isn't it? And entire cities were destroyed. The introduction of modern weaponry, so such as machine guns, tanks, and chemical weapons. So, and that made the conflict particularly devastating, destructible, right? So, you talk about that. Think of it. If the nuclear bomb was not there, then Japan or the kind of act occurred in Hiroshima would not, suffer a lot. So, because of this advanced weapon, right? So, or weapons, or armors, so, or arms, so, and other bombs, so that are cause nothing but a lot of lives, isn't it? So you can say that what the introduction of modern weaponry such as machine guns, tanks, chemical weapons that made the conflict particularly destructible. The psychological trauma, right? Psychological trauma means that called as a mental trauma. We read that, no? What is that point? Suicide. So suicide in the trenches, right? So psychological trauma experienced by soldiers often referred to as nothing but a shell shock, right? So what do you mean by shell shock? That called as nothing but a kind of a bomb, right? So psychological trauma that experienced by the soldiers. So soldiers experience such kind of a thought that they will definitely die. So even if they're amputate, even if their limb or means a part of the body is not there, still they are means of fighting. It's not restricted to the young, middle. It refers to the even children who are associated, isn't it, in the war? So that often referred to as a shell shock at the time highlighted the human cost of industrialized warfare. Okay. So the next stage called as the changes in perception and values, right? If you talk about that, the First World War shattered many of the ideals. Ideals means that called as the thoughts or perfect thoughts that had defined the pre-war era, right? So whatever the ideology people have, so all those things are, means shattered, destroyed, right? People means forget all those ethics, values, all morals, principles, everything. So the belief in progress, reason, and the surety of human advancement gave way to disillusionment and skepticism. Right. So when you talk about skepticism, it's called as a doubt. So you can say that what the progress, region, and human advancement, those of the things, right, lead to nothing but taking the whole world means decade or century back, isn't it? So traditional institutions, including the monarchy, right? Monarchy means king, right? Religion and the aristocracy, higher society people, they were also increasingly questioned. Right. So in literature, this shift was reflected in a move away from the romanticism and optimism of the 19th century. Right. In literature, this shift, this changes was reflected in a move away from the romanticism and a kind of a hope, optimism of the 19th century. When you went back to the decade or called as a century, so when you come out, you keep the hope that okay, we will also progress. Right. So writers begin to explore themes of alienation, right? Themes of fragmentation. So and the search of meaning in a chaotic world. Now, what is present in the world? Right. Everything is lost. So and something is sure that you are no more in this world. Right. So this or nothing is permanent in this show, this world. This period saw the rise of nothing but modernist literature and characterized by nothing but the experimentation with the form and narrative. So after that, you talk about Karl Marx concept of class struggle. So we talk about nothing but the outbreak of war and what happened means after the war, right? Then we talk about that means class struggle. So when we talk about class struggle, we talk about Karl Marx concept. So what is that Karl Marx concept of class struggle? So understanding class struggle. Karl Marx, who is he? A German philosopher and an economist. So, who introduced the concept of class struggle as a nothing but a driving force in history, right? According to Marx, that what society is divided into classes based on their relationship to the means of production, right? So the tools, resources, and infrastructure needed to produce goods and services, isn't it? Let's talk about it. So whom do you call Gopal or Gaud? I mean, na Gouda or Gopala. So somebody, those who keep cows, right? So those who means distribute your milk, right or not? So at the same time, those who do the cobbler job, right? So it means Karl Marx wanted to say that the society is divided into classes based on their what relationship to the means of production. So what they produce on the basis of the production, right? So we consider the class that belongs to. So Brahmin, it means puja is done by him, right or not? So tools, resources, and infrastructure needed to produce goods and services. So you find out two types of class here. One is called as a bourgeois. Now, what is bourgeois? Bourgeois is indicating as a middle class, right? And another one is called the proletariat. So, bourgeois, bourgeois class that owns the means of production and controls economic power, right? So, you have also another one. It's called as hoi polloi, Hoipolloi, hoi polloi, bourgeois, and proletariat, right? So bourgeois, bourgeoisie, bourgeois. So this class owns the means of production and controls economic power. These are nothing but the middle class people, and what do they do? Now they produce and controls economic power, isn't it? So let's talk about that China, who is manufacturing, isn't it? Producing. It means if you talk about that, the largest middle class people you find out in China, right? But if you talk about India, which is known as the means even at present considered as the topmost, right? So will be the service sector. Service sector. It means here in India, you would find out most of the people engaged in servicing, service job, right? So you can say that what bourgeois are the production and controls economic power, and the proletariat. This class, that's what sells its labor to the bourgeois in exchange for wages, right? It means these people do what? Sells its labor. So when they sell the people, so that what the bourgeois people engage them and means give them the salary, right? So proletariat. So Marx argued that the interests of these two classes are inherently opposed, right? Inherently opposed means contradictory. So why? Now the bourgeois seeks to maximize profits. Bourgeois means middle class people, so who seeks to maximize or increase their profit, isn't it? So often at the expense of the proletariat, right? So while the proletariat strives for better wages and working conditions, I think I did the opposite here. Proletariat is indicating as a middle class. I think. Let's see that. Mm-hmm. Working class people, huh? Proletariat are the working class people. And we talk about middle class. Right. It is the middle class. Bourgeois is the middle class. So what does it say? The bourgeois seeks to maximize profits and often at the expense of the proletariat. So proletariat who sells the labor, right? While the proletariat fights for better salaries and working conditions, this conflict. Marx believed that what it would ultimately lead to a revolution and the establishment of a classless society. So if bourgeois and proletariat means follows the kind of a process they followed, so it would ultimately lead what? Lead to a revolution and the establishment of a classless society. Classless society means called as an imbalance in the society. See, what do we talk about that? We talk about the two classes, bourgeois and proletariat. So proletariat are the working class people, or means they do what? Means they sell the labor, right? Now bourgeois people they buy the labor, right? And they engage them and give them the salary. Now what happened? Means if the proletariat people means gets engaged, bourgeois people try to maximize their profit. Why? How do they maximize? Now they maximize on the basis of what they get from the proletariat, isn't it? Now what they get from the proletariat, now proletariat became poorer and bourgeois became middle class to rich. So it indicates nothing but an imbalance in the society, isn't it? So that is why it is called as a revolution in the establishment of the classless society. Right. So how it influenced on literature. So Marx ideas is called a classless society. So Marx ideas inspired many writers and thinkers, particularly in the 20th century. So his critique of capitalism and exploration of power dynamics resonated with authors who desired to address social and economic issues. Literary works influenced by Marxist thought often highlight themes of exploitation, inequality, and resistance. So these three also come. For example, we talk about George Orwell's. George Orwell's written Animal Farm, right? So what do you find out? So not only George Orwell's written Animal Farm and also 1984. It's the name of the means a book even. Reflect concerns about the power, control, and social structure. These are the key words. Please do remember. So when we talk about means bourgeois and proletariat and the classless society, class struggles. We need to keep, these are the words that what, how they means highlight themes of exploitation, inequality, resistance, and even we talk about certain means books or novels where we find out power, control, and social structure. Right. While you talk about novels like John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, The Grapes of Wrath, that depicts the struggles of the working class people, right? So you find out that Karl Marx thought of class struggles, right? That represents nothing but means in different novels, right? And how it indicates the means classless society and the inequality in the society, isn't it? And what are the means regions behind it, right? So the next one we can talk about is called the Freud's theory of the unconscious, right? Freud's theory of the unconscious. So when we talk about Freud's theory of the unconscious, I think this becomes the last one, no? Okay, the unconscious mind, right? So Sigmund Freud, who is he? Now, the Sigmund Freud as an Austrian neurologist, right? And the father of psychoanalysis, right? So psycho means referring to the mind or brain. Psychoanalysis is called as to analyze the means of brain or knowledge. You can say that. So means Sigmund Freud is an Austrian neurologist and the father of psychoanalysis, revolutionized our understanding of the human mind. Right. He proposed that much of human behavior is what? Much of human behavior is influenced by the unconscious. Right. A part of the mind that contains desires, fears, and memories that are not accessible to conscious awareness. Isn't it? So, few divided the mind into three components. What are those three components? You can find out the id. So the id represents what? Represents primal desires and instincts. We also have a kind of a movie called Primal Instincts, right? So primal desires and instincts, such as you can say hunger and aggression, that is known as the id. Second is called the ego, right? That mediates between the id and the external world, right? So means internal and the external world, striving for balance, that is known as the ego. So third is called as the supergo. What is that supergo? That reflects nothing but the internalized societal norms. Internalized societal norms and moral values. Right. So few Sigmund Freud also introduced the concept of what? A repression, concept of repression, where unpleasant or traumatic memories are, pushed into the unconscious. Right. Unconscious means without even knowing. So these repressed memories, however, can influence behavior and emotion. Right. Often displaying in dreams, slip of the tongues. So like in dreams, you badbadate hai na. So and slip of the tongue, you are trying to say something, but you say something unconsciously, or psychological disorders. Sometimes also when you are means injured, right? So in that case, the impact on literature, Freud's theories had a profound impact on literature. What now that gives rise to a new focus on character, psychology, and inner conflict. Right. So writers begin to delve into the complexities of the human mind, exploring themes of desire, fear, and identity. Right. Modernist authors like James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, that or who employed what? Stream of consciousness, right? Stream of consciousness techniques to indicate what? Indicate the flow of thoughts and feelings in their characters' minds, right? So Freud's influence is also, witness or evident in the works of what? Another writer whose name is called Franz Kafka, right? Or Franz Kafka, whose stories often explore themes of what? Means alienation, means loneliness, and also existential anxiety, right? So you feel like what you are present, right? So, and no one else, existential anxiety. So, changes in ways of knowing and perceiving. When you talk about that, the social, economic, and intellectual developments of the early 20th century fundamentally changed how people understood the world. The First World War, in particular, challenged traditional ways of thinking, right? Traditional ways of thinking, and led to what new approaches in philosophy, science, and art, right? Modernism in literature, modernism that came out as a dominant literary movement during this period. Modernist writers who rejected conventional storytelling techniques, experimenting with fragmented narratives or separated or short stories, multiple perspective, multiple areas where you observe, and also confusing endings, ambiguous endings. And these innovations or these creativity reflected the difficulties and uncertainties of the modern world. So here you find out the key characteristic of modernist literature that include with a focus on individual consciousness and subjective experience, right? A break from linear storytelling. Then third is called as an emphasis on symbolism and imagery. And fourth one, a sense of alienation and dislocation. So these are nothing but called the main characteristics. So, and the last, the rise of existentialism. When we talk about the rise of existentialism, we definitely remember Jean Paul Sartre. Dislocation. I told you, alienation means what? You feel lonely. You feel lonely. Dislocation means what? You feel that you are not exist, right? Or you may exist, but no one else present around you, right? So that is what I told you in the earlier part. So the rise of existentialism. So when we talk about the rise of existentialism, we talk about Jean Paul Sartre, right? So who is a philosopher? So philosophers like Jean Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. So those explored questions of meaning. Those explored freedom and responsibility in a world perceived as chaotic, confusing, and indifferent. Right. So existentialist ideas that resonated with the writers, that goes with writers and artists who grappling with the aftermath of the war. It means what we are talking about. We are talking about what happened after the World War, right? Aftermath of the war and the collapse of traditional values. Because what our key idea of this text is nothing but talking about means the World War and aftermath of the World War and the traditional values, how that collapsed. So finally, if you talk about that, the developments in society and economy that leads to the First World War, right? That combined with the ideas of thinkers. Who are those thinkers? Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and you find out philosophers like Sartre, right? Jean Paul Sartre. So profoundly influenced Western culture and literature. So, and this period that marked switching from traditional to modern wage, right? Of knowing and perceiving. Knowing means what you understand and you experience, right? Characterized by a focus on individual experience, social critique, and psychological depth. By understanding these historical and intellectual context, so you can get deeper insights into the themes and innovations, right? When you go to the English literature during this transformative era, right? So